Few battles have left as profound an impact as the Battle of Verdun. Stretching from February 21 to December 18, 1916, this colossal confrontation between French and German forces epitomized the sheer brutality and futility of World War I's trench warfare. Verdun was not merely a battle for territory, it was a calculated attempt by Germany to bleed France dry. A grim strategy of attrition that led to one of the longest and most devastating battles in human history. This is the story of Verdun, a saga of unwavering determination, unimaginable suffering, and the indomitable human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. Prelude to carnage. As 1916 dawned, Europe had been embroiled in the Great War for nearly 2 years. The initial hopes for a swift and decisive conflict had long faded. The Western Front had settled into a deadly stalemate, with both the Allied and Central powers entrenched along a line stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border. The war had become a grinding war of attrition, characterized by muddy trenches, barbed wire, and the ever-present specter of death, Germany. Seeking a way to break the deadlock, turned to Erich von Falkenhayn, the chief of the German General Staff. Falkenhayn, a seasoned military strategist, had risen through the ranks of the Prussian army and had served as Prussia's military attaché in China during the Boxer Rebellion. His experiences had shaped his views on warfare, leading him to believe that the key to victory lay not in a breakthrough, but in the exhaustion of the enemy's resources and morale. In his infamous Christmas memorandum to Kaiser Wilhelm II, dated December 25, 1915, Falkenhayn proposed a strategy to target a point of vital importance to France, Verdun. This memorandum, which outlined the rationale for what would become one of the most brutal battles in history, stated, "The string in France has reached breaking point. A mass breakthrough, which in any case is beyond our means, is unnecessary. Within our reach, there are objectives for the retention of which the French General Staff would be compelled to throw in every man they have. If they do so, the forces of France will bleed to death." Verdun was more than just a city. It was a symbol of French resilience and military pride. Situated on the Meuse River in northeastern France, Verdun had been a fortress town since Roman times. Its strategic importance had been recognized for centuries, serving as a key defensive position along the Franco-German border. The city's ring of fortifications had been modernized in the late 19th century, making it one of the most fortified places on Earth. The defensive system consisted of an inner ring of 19 large forts and an outer ring of 40 smaller ones. Among these, Fort Douaumont and Fort Vaux would become synonymous with the battle itself. However, by 1916, many of Verdun's defenses had been stripped of artillery and manpower to reinforce other fronts. The French High Command, focusing on offensive strategies, had neglected the fortress city, leaving it vulnerable. Of the original 489 heavy guns and mortars in the Verdun sector, only 270 remained by February 1916. The garrison had been reduced from 66,000 men to about 20,000. Falkenhayn's plan was chilling in its simplicity. By attacking Verdun, the Germans would compel the French to commit vast numbers of troops to its defense. The goal was not necessarily to capture the city, but to inflict maximum casualties, to bleed France white. This strategy of attrition was based on the assumption that France would defend Verdun at all costs, due to its symbolic importance. The storm unleashed. At 7:15 a.m. on February 21, 1916, the German artillery unleashed a torrent of fire upon Verdun's defenses. Over 1,200 guns, including the massive 420mm Big Bertha howitzers, pummeled French positions. The bombardment was unprecedented in scale and ferocity, lasting for 9 hours without respite. Trees were uprooted, trenches obliterated, and the very contours of the land were altered. The artillery barrage was a crucial part of the German strategy, not just preparation for the infantry assault. Altogether, they could fire over 1,000 shells in 12 hours, a rate of fire never seen before in warfare. French soldiers huddled in their dugouts endured a living nightmare. One described the ordeal in his diary. "It was as if the world was ending. The earth shook incessantly, and the air was filled with the screams of shells and the cries of the wounded. There was nowhere to hide from the steel rain. We could only pray and wait, wondering if the next explosion would be our last. When the barrage lifted, German infantry advanced behind a creeping artillery barrage, a relatively new tactic designed to protect attacking troops. The initial German assault met with surprising success. The French front lines had been decimated and the survivors were too shell-shocked to mount effective resistance. The German forces, comprising the Fifth Army under Crown Prince Wilhelm, consisted of 7 divisions for the initial assault. They were faced by only 2 French divisions in the immediate Verdun sector. This numerical superiority, combined with the devastating artillery preparation, allowed the Germans to make significant gains in the early days of the battle. By February 25th, the Germans had captured Fort Douaumont, the largest and most formidable of Verdun's defenses. Remarkably, the fort was taken almost without a fight. A small German reconnaissance party found it virtually unoccupied. The fall of Douaumont sent shockwaves through France. The ease with which this supposedly impregnable fortress had fallen seemed to validate Falkenhayn's strategy and raise serious concerns about the French ability to hold Verdun. The call to defend. The situation was dire, and the French command knew immediate action was required. General Joseph Joffre, the French commander-in-chief, appointed General Philippe Pétain to take charge of Verdun's defense. Pétain, at 59 years old, was known for his calm demeanor and concern for his soldiers' welfare, qualities that would prove invaluable in the coming months. Pétain's appointment was somewhat unexpected. He had been considering retirement before the war and was not part of the French army's inner circle. However, his successful defense of the Artois region in 1914 and his innovative tactics had brought him to Joffre's attention. Pétain's approach to warfare, which emphasized firepower over mass infantry assaults, was well suited to the defensive battle that Verdun would become. Upon arriving at Verdun on February 25th, Pétain immediately reorganized the defense by establishing a strong command structure, reinforcing the troops with fresh divisions, improving artillery coordination, and enhancing communication lines. Recognizing that maintaining a steady flow of troops and supplies was crucial, he focused on securing the Bar-le-Duc road, the only viable supply route into Verdun. This road would become known as La Voie Sacrée, or the Sacred Way, a lifeline upon which the fate of Verdun rested. The importance of the Sacred Way cannot be overstated. During the battle, this 75-kilometer stretch of road saw an average of 3,500 motorized vehicles per day, carrying approximately 90,000 men and 50,000 tons of supplies each week. The road was constantly maintained by a dedicated force of 12,000 men, who worked tirelessly to repair damage from weather and enemy shelling. Pétain also implemented a rotation system for the troops, unlike the Germans who kept their divisions in the line for extended periods. Pétain ensured that French units were relieved regularly. This policy helped maintain morale and combat effectiveness even under the most harrowing conditions. By the end of the battle, about 70% of the entire French army had served at Verdun, with an average unit staying in the line for 2 weeks before being rotated out. He issued a simple yet powerful order: "Ils ne passeront pas," they shall not pass. This phrase would become the embodiment of French resolve at Verdun. It was disseminated through orders of the day, posters, and word of mouth, becoming a rallying cry for the defenders. Pétain's leadership had an immediate impact on the morale of the troops. His frequent visits to the front lines and his attention to the welfare of his men earned him their trust and respect. One soldier wrote home, "General Pétain has been here again today. He spoke to us, asked about our needs, and promised that reinforcements are coming. His presence gives us strength. We believe in him, and we will hold." The grinding machine of war. As winter gave way to spring, the battle intensified. The Germans launched repeated assaults, aiming to capture the high ground surrounding Verdun. Key positions such as Le Mort-Homme, Dead Man's Hill, and Hill 304 became scenes of incessant fighting. The names themselves became synonymous with death and destruction. Le Mort-Homme, standing at 295 meters, was a key observation point overlooking the battlefield. Its twin hills were the scene of ferocious fighting from March to May 1916. The French and Germans exchanged control of the position multiple times, with tens of thousands of casualties on both sides. By the end of the fighting, the hill had been reduced in height by several meters due to constant shelling. Hill 304, named for its height in meters, was another critical position. The Germans launched their first major attack on the hill on April 20th, 1916. The fighting here was particularly brutal, with both sides using flamethrowers and poison gas. By early May, the Germans had taken the hill, but at a terrible cost. One German officer described the scene. Hill 304 has disappeared. It has been leveled by the most horrific bombardment ever seen. It is no longer a feature of the landscape, but a muddy bump in a sea of craters. The landscape was transformed into a hellish tableau. The constant shelling churned the soil, unearthing the dead and destroying any semblance of natural terrain. Rain mixed with the pulverized earth to create a quagmire that swallowed men, horses, and equipment alike. The battlefield became a moonscape of craters, some large enough to swallow entire platoons. Soldiers lived in deplorable conditions. Trenches were often little more than water-filled ditches. Rats and lice were constant companions, and the stench of death was omnipresent. Food and clean water were scarce, and medical facilities were overwhelmed. Disease was rampant, with dysentery and trench foot affecting large numbers of troops. A French soldier, writing in his diary, captured the grim reality of life in the trenches. "We live like animals, worse than animals. We are surrounded by corpses. We eat next to the dead. We sleep next to them. We have become indifferent to their presence. The stench of rotting flesh is our constant companion. We are no longer men, but shadows of what we once were." Despite these hardships, the French soldiers held their ground. Stories of individual heroism abounded. Men like Lieutenant Colonel Émile Drian, who led a valiant but doomed defense of the Bois des Cours, became legends. Driant and his men held off the German advance for 2 critical days before being overrun. His sacrifice bought precious time for Pétain to strengthen Verdun's defenses. Driant, a 61-year-old reserve officer and member of the French Chamber of Deputies, had warned of the vulnerability of the Verdun sector before the battle. He led his men from the front when the German attack came, organizing a stubborn defense that slowed the German advance. His last message, sent on February 22nd, read, "We are holding on, but the situation is desperate. Send reinforcements quickly. Long live France." Driant was killed later that day, leading a counterattack. His body was recovered and buried by the Germans with full military honors, a testament to the respect he had earned even from his enemies. On the German side, Crown Prince Wilhelm, the Kaiser's son, nominally commanded the attacking forces. However, real control rested with more experienced generals. The Germans, too, suffered immensely. The relentless attacks yielded minimal gains at exorbitant costs. The strategy of attrition was proving costly for both sides. The German soldiers faced their own set of challenges. The offensive nature of their mission meant they were often exposed to French artillery fire as they attempted to advance. The gains made were usually measured in meters rather than kilometers, and each advance brought them into terrain that had been devastated by their own artillery, making it difficult to consolidate their positions. A German soldier described the toll of the constant fighting. "We attack, we gain a few meters, and then we are driven back. The next day we do it all again. Each time there are fewer of us. We are not fighting against men, but against steel and fire. This is not war, but murder." The struggle for the forts. The fortresses around Verdun became focal points of the battle. Fort Vaux, in particular, witnessed some of the most intense combat. Commanded by Major Sylvain Raynal, the garrison of Fort Vaux held out against overwhelming odds in June 1916. Fort Vaux, built between 1881 and 1884, was part of the outer ring of fortifications around Verdun. Although smaller than Fort Douaumont, it occupied a crucial position overlooking the plains east of Verdun. The fort's garrison consisted of about 250 men, a mix of regular soldiers and territorial troops. Cut off from supplies and reinforcements, the defenders endured continuous bombardment and assaults. The fort's water supply was destroyed, forcing the soldiers to ration what little they had. In the claustrophobic tunnels and chambers, fighting was often hand-to-hand. The Germans used flamethrowers and poison gas to try to flush out the defenders. The conditions inside the fort were appalling. Men fought in a nightmarish environment. The lack of water led to extreme measures. One French soldier recalled, "We collected the condensation from the walls. We even drank our own urine. Anything to moisten our parched throats and keep fighting." Despite the hopeless situation, Major Reynolds sent carrier pigeons with messages pleading for relief. One such message read, "We are still holding, but relief is imperative. The men are fighting to the last. Long live France." The last pigeon sent from the fort, named Valiant, delivered its message despite being severely wounded by German fire. The bird was awarded the Animal Valor Cross for its service. Ultimately, with ammunition and water exhausted and casualties mounting, Reynal had no choice but to surrender on June 7th. His defense had lasted 7 days and had become a symbol of bravery and determination. The Germans, impressed by his gallantry, allowed him to keep his sword as he was taken into captivity. Meanwhile, the French were planning to retake Fort Douaumont. On May 22nd, they launched a massive assault involving heavy artillery and infantry attacks. The fighting was brutal and costly, with neither side able to secure a decisive advantage. The fort remained in German hands, but the French continued their efforts to reclaim it. The struggle for Fort Douaumont would continue throughout the battle. Its massive structure, with walls up to 3 meters thick, made it a formidable defensive position. The Germans had turned it into a stronghold, using it as a shelter for troops and a base for counterattacks. The fort changed hands several times during the battle. Each assault and counter-assault left the structure more damaged, but no less important strategically. By the end of the battle, the once imposing fortress was a shattered ruin, a testament to the destructive power of modern artillery. The air war over Verdun. While ground forces grappled in the mud and blood below, the skies above Verdun became the arena for a new kind of warfare. Both sides recognized the strategic importance of air superiority for reconnaissance and artillery spotting. The Battle of Verdun saw significant advancements in aerial warfare. At the start of the battle, aircraft were primarily used for reconnaissance, but their role quickly expanded to include artillery spotting, bombing raids, and aerial combat. The French deployed their ace pilots, including Georges Guinemer and Charles Nunges, to challenge German air dominance. The Germans, led by the likes of Oswald Boelke and Max Immelmann, responded in kind. The air battles over Verdun saw the evolution of aerial tactics and the emergence of the fighter ace as a new kind of hero. Georges Guinemer, who would become one of France's most celebrated pilots, began his career at Verdun. Flying the Nieuport 10, he scored several victories over the battlefield. Guinemer's exploits boosted French morale and helped establish the image of the fighter pilot as a modern-day knight of the sky. On the German side, Oswald Boelke, already a renowned pilot, used the skies over Verdun to further develop his famous Dicta Boelke, a set of fundamental rules of air combat that are still relevant today. These included tactics such as attacking from the direction of the sun and flying in pairs for mutual support. Aircraft technology advanced rapidly during this period. Innovations such as synchronization gear allowed machine guns to fire through propeller blades, making planes more effective in combat. The Fokker Eindecker, equipped with this technology, gave the Germans a temporary advantage known as the Fokker Scourge. Airships and observation balloons were also used extensively, despite their vulnerability to enemy fighters. These platforms provided valuable intelligence on troop movements and helped direct artillery fire. However, they were also easy targets, and their destruction often resulted in spectacular aerial conflagrations. The air war added another deadly dimension to the Battle of Verdun, impacting troop movements and artillery effectiveness. Control of the skies became as crucial as control of the ground. By the end of the battle, both sides had lost hundreds of aircraft and many of their best pilots. The impact of new weapons. Verdun was a testing ground for new weapons and tactics that would come to define World War I. Among these were flamethrowers, which the Germans used to horrifying effect in trench assaults. The weapons spewed jets of flaming oil capable of clearing enemy positions and instilling terror among defenders. The flamethrower, or Flammenwerfer, was first used on a large scale at Verdun. The German army had two types: the small, man-portable Kleinflammenwerfer, and the larger, more powerful Großflammenwerfer. These weapons could project flames up to 25 meters, clearing trenches and fortified positions. The psychological impact was often greater than the physical damage. One French soldier described the terror of facing this new weapon. We saw a jet of flame coming towards us like a dragon's breath. Men were engulfed in fire, screaming as they burned. Those who weren't hit fled in panic. How can one fight against such a hellish invention? Poison gas, first used on a large scale at the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915, was also employed at Verdun. Both sides used various chemical agents, including chlorine and phosgene gas. The indiscriminate nature of gas warfare meant that soldiers lived in constant fear, donning gas masks at the slightest hint of an attack. The use of gas at Verdun was not as extensive as in other battles, partly due to the unpredictable winds in the hilly terrain. However, its presence added another layer of horror to the soldiers' experiences. Gas masks, while providing protection, were uncomfortable and reduced visibility, making combat even more challenging. Artillery technology had advanced, with the introduction of heavy mortars and long-range guns. The German Paris-Gun, though not used at Verdun, symbolized the emphasis on artillery supremacy. This massive weapon, capable of firing shells over 130 kilometers, represented the pinnacle of artillery technology at the time. At Verdun, both sides employed a wide array of artillery pieces, from light field guns to massive siege howitzers. The French 75mm field gun, renowned for its rapid-fire capability, played a crucial role in breaking up German attacks. The German 420mm Big Bertha howitzers, on the other hand, were used to demolish French fortifications. Machine guns continued to dominate the battlefield, making mass infantry assaults deadly and often futile. The French relied heavily on the Hotchkiss M1914, while the Germans used the MG08. These weapons could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, creating near-impenetrable barriers of lead. The combination of these weapons contributed to the staggering casualty rates and the static nature of trench warfare. Traditional tactics of mass infantry charges proved suicidal in the face of such firepower, leading to a grueling war of attrition. The toll on the soldiers. The human cost of Verdun extended beyond physical casualties. The psychological strain on the soldiers was immense. The term shell shock emerged during World War I to describe the mental trauma experienced by those exposed to the constant bombardments. Shell shock, now recognized as a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, manifested in various ways, including uncontrollable shaking, inability to reason, paralysis, blindness or deafness without a physical cause, and severe depression and anxiety. Many soldiers suffered from nightmares, anxiety, and debilitating fatigue. The constant presence of death and the gruesome conditions eroded morale. Letters home often censored the worst details, but diaries and accounts revealed the depth of despair. One French soldier wrote, "We are no longer living beings. We are specters, shadows haunting the ruins of what was once a world. Hope has abandoned us, and we exist only to endure. Each day blends into the next, an endless cycle of shelling, mud, and death. I fear I will never be the man I once was, even if I survive this hell." The psychological impact of the battle extended far beyond the war years. Many veterans struggled to reintegrate into civilian life, haunted by their experiences. The French term ceux de Verdun, those of Verdun, came to describe a generation marked by the battle's trauma. Desertion and self-inflicted wounds became issues for military authorities. By 1916, the French army had already dealt with mutinies and a crisis of morale. At Verdun, the intensity of the fighting and the seemingly endless nature of the battle pushed many to their breaking point. Punishments were harsh, with some soldiers executed as a deterrent. The French army carried out 600 executions during the war, many for desertion or cowardice. However, as the battle wore on, military authorities began to recognize the impact of combat stress, and more compassionate approaches were sometimes employed. Yet, despite the hardships, camaraderie among the troops provided a lifeline. Shared suffering forged bonds that helped many endure the unendurable. Soldiers relied on dark humor and small acts of kindness to maintain their sanity. One veteran recalled, "We laughed at things that would have horrified us before the war. It was our way of coping. We shared our last bit of bread, our last drop of water. In that hell, the man next to you was more than a comrade. He was your brother, your lifeline to humanity." The home front and propaganda. Back in France, Verdun became a rallying point for national unity. The government and media portrayed the battle as a heroic defense against a ruthless invader. Propaganda posters urged citizens to support the war effort, buy war bonds, and conserve resources. The French government, recognizing the symbolic importance of Verdun, launched a massive propaganda campaign. Posters depicted valiant French soldiers standing firm against the German onslaught, often accompanied by slogans like "They shall not pass" and "Verdun, the frontier of civilization." Newspapers provided daily updates on the battle, though these were heavily censored and often overly optimistic. The journal L'Illustration published dramatic illustrations of the fighting, creating a romanticized image of the battle for those at home. Women stepped into roles left vacant by men who had gone to the front. They worked in factories, producing munitions and supplies vital for the war. The image of Rosie the Riveter, though more associated with World War II, had its roots in this period. Women also served as nurses, both at home and near the front lines, dealing with the horrific injuries inflicted by modern warfare. The war brought numerous hardships, including food shortages, rationing, and constant fear of bad news from the front. Civilians endured strict rationing of food and fuel, nighttime blackouts to guard against air raids, inflation, economic struggles, and the emotional toll of worrying about loved ones at the front. In Germany, the government also used Verdun to bolster support, highlighting supposed victories and downplaying losses. Propaganda emphasized the bravery of German soldiers and the strategic importance of the offensive. However, as the battle dragged on with no decisive outcome, public fatigue and skepticism grew. The German home front faced similar challenges to France, with food shortages becoming particularly acute due to the British naval blockade. The turnip winter of 1916-1917 saw widespread malnutrition and hardship among German civilians. Internationally, the protracted battle drew attention and concern. Allies like Britain and Russia recognized the strain on France and sought ways to alleviate it. This led to coordinated offensives elsewhere, such as the Battle of the Somme, intended to divert German resources from Verdun. The Battle of Verdun also had diplomatic repercussions. Neutral countries, particularly the United States, were horrified by the scale of the carnage. Reports from journalists and diplomats contributed to a growing anti-war sentiment in these nations, though it would take another year before the US entered the conflict. The turning tide. By mid-1916, the dynamics of the war were shifting. The Battle of the Somme, launched by British and French forces on July 1st, forced Germany to divert troops from Verdun. The Somme offensive, while costly for the Allies, achieved its strategic objective of relieving pressure on Verdun. Additionally, Russia's Brusilov offensive on the Eastern Front further stretched German resources. This massive attack, launched on June 4th, saw Russian forces advance up to 150 kilometers, inflicting heavy casualties on Austro-Hungarian and German forces. The need to reinforce the Eastern Front meant fewer reserves were available for operations at Verdun. Recognizing an opportunity, General Robert Nivelle, who had succeeded Pétain at Verdun, planned a counter-offensive. Nivelle, known for his aggressive tactics, believed that carefully coordinated artillery and infantry attacks could break the stalemate. With improved artillery tactics, including the use of creeping barrages, the French aimed to retake lost ground. The creeping barrage was a significant innovation. It involved artillery fire that moved forward at a preset pace, just ahead of the advancing infantry. This provided a moving wall of explosions to suppress enemy defenses, allowing the infantry to advance with some protection. While not always perfectly executed, it represented a major improvement in coordinating artillery and infantry actions. On October 24th, the French launched a massive attack. Preceded by a devastating artillery bombardment, French troops advanced behind a wall of fire. The assault was successful, and by November 2nd, Fort Douaumont was back in French hands. Fort Vaux followed on November 2nd. The recapture of Fort Douaumont was a significant morale boost for the French. The fort, which had fallen almost without a fight in February, was retaken after a fierce battle. The French 38th Division, led by General Charles Mangin, spearheaded the attack. Mangin famously declared, "Messieurs, we attack tomorrow for France, capture Douaumont." These victories boosted French morale and signaled that the tide had turned. The German High Command, facing mounting pressures on multiple fronts, began to reconsider the value of continuing the Verdun offensive. Falkenhayn's strategy of bleeding France white had failed. Instead, both sides had suffered enormous casualties, and the German army was now on the defensive. On August 29th, Falkenhayn was replaced as chief of the German General Staff by Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, with General Erich Ludendorff as his deputy. The end of the Inferno. As winter approached, the Battle of Verdun drew to a close. On December 18th, after 303 days of relentless combat, the fighting subsided. Both sides were exhausted, having suffered appalling losses for minimal territorial gain. The final toll was staggering, with French casualties around 377,000, including 162,000 killed, and German casualties similarly high at 337,000, with 143,000 killed. Although the exact numbers are debated, the human cost is undeniable. An average of 70,000 casualties per month, roughly 300 per day, with the combined total equaling the population of a city like New Orleans. Verdun had become the longest battle in modern history, a symbol of the war's senseless slaughter. The front lines had shifted by only a few miles, and the strategic situation remained largely unchanged. The landscape was unrecognizable, pockmarked with shell craters and littered with the detritus of war. The battle had consumed vast quantities of material. It's estimated that over 60 million artillery shells were fired during the course of the battle. This averages to over 100 shells per square meter in the battle area. The ground was so saturated with unexploded ordnance that large tracts of land were deemed uninhabitable. Aftermath and reflections. In the aftermath, both nations grappled with the consequences. For France, the battle became a symbol of national pride and sacrifice. General Pétain was hailed as the hero of Verdun, though his legacy would later become controversial due to his role in World War II. The battlefield was so devastated that entire villages were wiped off the map and never rebuilt. These villages that died for France were granted special status, with appointed mayors to maintain their memory. Areas were declared Zone Rouge, or red zones, deemed uninhabitable due to unexploded ordnance and contamination. Even today, these areas bear the scars of the conflict. The Zone Rouge initially covered over 200 square kilometers, 460 sq, and while much has been reclaimed, some areas remain off-limits more than a century later. The French government established memorials and cemeteries to honor the fallen. The Douaumont ossuary, completed in 1932, houses the remains of over 130,000 unidentified soldiers from both sides. It stands as a somber reminder of the war's toll. The ossuary's tower, rising 46 meters, 151 feet, is visible for miles around, its eternal flame a testament to the sacrifice of those who fought and died at Verdun. For Germany, Verdun was a bitter disappointment. Falkenhayn was replaced by Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, who shifted strategies. The failure to break the French at Verdun contributed to a reassessment of German war aims and tactics. The battle also influenced military thinking, as the heavy casualties with minimal gains highlighted the futility of attrition warfare. This led to innovations in tactics and technology later in the war, including improved coordination between infantry and artillery, the development of stormtrooper tactics, and advancements in aerial warfare. Verdun in memory and culture. Verdun left an indelible mark on French culture and collective memory. It became a subject of literature, art, and film. Writers like Henri Barbusse, who served at Verdun, penned works that captured the grim reality of trench warfare. Barbusse's novel Le Feu, Under Fire, published in 1916, was one of the first to depict the horrors of trench warfare realistically. It won the Prix Goncourt and was widely read, helping to shape public perception of the war. The phrase "Ils ne passeront pas" endured as a symbol of defiance. It was later used in other conflicts, most notably by Republican forces during the Spanish Civil War, "No passerán." Monuments across France commemorate the battle, and annual ceremonies honor the sacrifice of those who fought. The Verdun Memorial, inaugurated in 1967, is one of the most important war museums in France. It receives over 500,000 visitors annually. In Germany, Verdun was less celebrated but remained a poignant reminder of the war's cost. German veterans associations often focused on honoring the fallen rather than glorifying the battle itself. The shared suffering led to moments of reconciliation in later years. In 1984, French President François Mitterrand and German Chancellor Helmut Kohl stood hand in hand at Verdun, symbolizing Franco-German friendship and a commitment to peace. This powerful gesture, captured in a famous photograph, became an iconic symbol of European reconciliation. Kohl later reflected on the moment, "We stood there hand in hand for a long time. Words were unnecessary. The gesture spoke for itself." This act of reconciliation was not an isolated incident. Over the years, Verdun has become a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand the war and its legacy. Joint French-German commemorations have become regular events, emphasizing the shared history and the importance of maintaining peace in Europe. Lessons from Verdun. The Battle of Verdun serves as a stark lesson on the perils of total war. It exemplifies how nationalist fervor and strategic miscalculations can lead to catastrophic consequences. The battle highlighted the disconnect between military leadership and the realities faced by soldiers on the ground. Falkenhayn's strategy of attrition, while theoretically sound from a strategic perspective, failed to account for the human cost and the resilience of the French defenders. Similarly, the French High Command's initial neglect of Verdun's defenses nearly led to disaster. Verdun exposed the inadequacies of traditional tactics in the face of modern weaponry. The dominance of defensive firepower, particularly machine guns and artillery, rendered large-scale infantry assaults obsolete. This lesson, though costly, would influence military doctrine in the years to come. The battle also underscored the importance of logistics, morale, and adaptability. Pétain's emphasis on troop rotation and supply lines proved critical in sustaining the defense. The Voie Sacrée demonstrated the crucial role of efficient logistics in modern warfare. The psychological impact of prolonged intense combat became evident at Verdun. The emergence of shell shock as a recognized condition forced military and medical authorities to confront the mental health challenges posed by modern warfare. This recognition, though limited at the time, laid the groundwork for future advancements in understanding and treating combat-related psychological trauma. Verdun also highlighted the growing importance of technology in warfare. The battle saw the use of aircraft, tanks, in its later stages, and advanced artillery, pointing towards the increasingly mechanized nature of future conflicts. Perhaps most importantly, Verdun symbolizes the resilience of the human spirit amidst unimaginable adversity. The soldiers on both sides endured conditions that tested the limits of endurance, yet they continued to fight, driven by duty, patriotism, or simply the will to survive. A French veteran reflecting on the battle years later said, "At Verdun, we learned the true meaning of endurance. We faced death every moment, yet we held on. It was not about victory or defeat, but about survival and honor. We fought not just for France, but for humanity itself." Verdun today. Today, Verdun is a place of pilgrimage and reflection. The once devastated landscape has been reclaimed by nature, but remnants of the battle remain. Trenches, forts, and shell craters are preserved as historical sites, offering visitors a tangible connection to the past. The Verdun Memorial Museum, renovated in 2016 for the battle's centenary, provides a comprehensive and immersive experience for visitors. It houses a vast collection of artifacts and utilizes modern technology to tell the story of the battle and its impact. Key sites that visitors can explore include Fort Douaumont, the Douaumont Ossuary, the destroyed village of Fleury-devant-Douaumont, the Trench of Bayonets, the Verdun Memoria. These sites collectively receive hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, including many school groups. The emphasis is on education and remembrance, with a focus on promoting peace and understanding. The battlefield itself continues to yield artifacts and human remains. Each year, the Département du Déminage, Department of Mine Clearance, recovers and disposes of about 40 tons of unexploded ordnance. The work is dangerous and ongoing, a reminder of the battle's enduring physical legacy. The environmental impact of the battle is still evident. The Zone Rouge has shrunk over the years as land has been reclaimed, but some areas remain too contaminated for human use. These zones have become de facto nature reserves, home to unique ecosystems that have adapted to the altered landscape. A quote from a recent visitor captures the enduring impact of Verdun. "Standing here where so many fought and died, you can't help but be moved. It's not just about France or Germany anymore. It's about all of us, about the price of war and the value of peace." Verdun speaks to us across the years, urging us to remember and to learn. The Battle of Verdun remains etched in history as a symbol of the tragic cost of war. It was a battle without victors, only survivors bearing the weight of loss and memories of unimaginable horror. As we reflect on Verdun, we honor the courage and sacrifice of those who fought and died. Their stories serve as a powerful reminder of the value of peace and the profound consequences when it is lost.